I'm Batman.
Well, I hardly think so. The real Cape Crusader calls his crime-fighting cohorts when he's running late.
I had to walk. I couldn't get Raj on the back of my scooter.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. Aquaman sucks.
And welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics. It is Friday, which means we've got the Geekend coming up. This has been one I've wanted to do for a long time, and it was actually quite a challenge. We're going to be doing the top 10, so this is a top 10 episode of the top 10 Marvel movies of all time. Let's get started.
The Tactics Top 10.
All right, so before we go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about, I do want to go ahead and mention the rules. So the only rules that we had for this one, any movie that was based on something from a Marvel comic book, so whether you're talking about things that are actually in the MCU universe with the Avengers, or anything that was just based off of a Marvel comic, that was eligible. And we did it the way that we always do top 10s. All of the panelists that we have here tonight voted. We smashed them all together and saw who came out on top. This was a really hard one, really contentious. There were 2 ties in it, which we've never had 2 ties before. We had to do several tiebreakers. It was a really, really difficult list to put together, but we think it's really solid. Hopefully you'll like it. Tonight we have Justin, Andrew, and a first-timer to the Geekend. Scott is joining us. Welcome in, guys. Thanks for being with us.
Hey. Hi.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get this started off.
Number 10.
So, number 10 on this list, Guardians of the Galaxy. And I really, really love this film. Really excited. I wasn't actually very excited to see this one when it first came out. I mean, I thought, okay, it's cool. I've seen Guardians. I think I've heard of them. But even as a pretty big Marvel comic book fan, I'd never heard of it. And I was really, really surprised that it turned out as good as it did. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies now.
Well, it barely didn't make my list. But, I mean, first of all, soundtrack. You gotta, I mean, that's one of the biggest takeaways. And it's starting off, awesome. But it was Marvel's first stab, if I remember correctly, at more of a comedy movie, because initially superhero movies were just superhero movies, and then it started to blend more into like hybrid genres, superhero, and this was more of a comedy almost than purely superhero movie, and it was a lot of fun, and you had interesting banter. You had was it Drax? I think it was Drax. Yeah, Drax was hilarious. The overly literal guy that doesn't get any of the jokes becomes the butt of the jokes. So, yeah, it was a fun movie. It just barely didn't make my own list, but I'm not at all angry that it made it onto the final top 10.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that Andrew's going to talk about this in a second, but soundtrack alone, I think, would at least merit consideration for the list. This is one of the best movie soundtracks of all time, without a doubt, in my opinion. I mean, I think it's right up there with Forrest Gump and Remember the Titans as far as great movie soundtracks.
Well, you're right. Soundtrack, absolute best. I'm kind of in the same boat with the comedy. Like when it first came out, I despised the movie. I didn't like it. I felt like, who is this guy that Chris Pratt's playing? Like, what is this nonsense? He's like a Star-Lord. Like, where is this guy? And I'm not a comic guy, so I don't remember, or I don't know anything about the comics. But this dude's just a guy that flies around with little pew-pews and shoots, goo at people, and that's about it. And there wasn't anybody really in that movie, aside from Groot maybe, that had anything special. Like, out of the Guardians group, like, no one had like a special power, at least not in this movie, where they could, do amazing things like Captain America, like super strong, incredibly fast healing. Logan, same thing. He could like heal through anything. Or Wolverine, sorry. I felt like the first time through watching it, I didn't like it. But as the the movies continued to come out and stories started to unfold, I really started to love it. It actually made it in my top 5 on my list. Just because the way everything kind of goes together, and you start loving the fact that these guys don't have those superhero powers like, you know, Captain Marvel. Instead, they're just, for the most part, just regular people, so to speak, that get together and fight bad guys. And everything from start to finish in the movie, I just started to fall in love with, especially what's the name's got the guy with the whistle wand that he goes around. I can't remember his name now. Anybody?
I know. I could see his face in my head. I can't.
Yeah, the Mohawk guy. I know who you're talking about.
Woody Harrelson.
Exactly. Man,
they're going to destroy us in the comment section for not knowing this.
I know the actor's name, but the character's name cannot remember.
Anyway, he's my favorite character in the whole series. So,
well,
man, it drives me nuts.
Not to like reiterate it, but I mean, opening up with 10cc, like I'm Not in Love, it's just it was definitely my favorite opening song of any movie I've seen. Like I think the weird one about the movie was the cast. So like, yeah, we talk about how, I mean, that was Chris Pratt's first divergence from comedy, or, you know, from a show. But then it's got like Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, like all these people that were huge at the time, John C. Reilly, Glenn Close. I know, like, I was excited when Benicio del Toro was announced, but then he had like a 5-minute role in the movie. But in general, it was just like a lot of big names that came together.
Sylvester Stallone.
Where was he?
You don't remember him? He's in the. He's one of the Raiders.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. You had like all these big people come. I mean, you had Vin Diesel in the movie to like have his voice changed, and you don't
to say "I am Groot" 40,000 times.
But even like you can't tell that that's him. You know, it's like who's BB-8? Not relevant, but. You know, it's like you have all these people that come together for this to have, no matter how small their role is, and it just makes a really good movie. I felt like the hype kind of blew up too much. Like it was good, but then like it just got too big. I thought the interesting part about this was like from a comic book aspect, like you saw a jump of like this was a $2 comic prior to the announcement of the movies, and you know, it wasn't crazy, but it was like a $40-$50 comic went for all the first appearances of these people. So I just thought that was an interesting one. Usually you see a larger spike, and we can talk about this more for other movies. But like, yeah, you had an incredibly niche subset get bigger because of a movie, which happens, but I don't think it happened to this extent just because this movie was so good.
No, I agree, and I know that you're going to probably be mad at me for saying this, but it's a bigger example of exactly what happened to Iron Man. Because people may not remember, unless you were actually into comics before the movies became such a big deal, Iron Man was like kind of a B-list hero. I won't say quite B-list, but he was not a big star in the Marvel Universe. And Guardians of the Galaxy literally came out of left field. I mean, nobody knew Guardians of the Galaxy. I was a comic book guy, and I think I only knew one or two of their names.
Yep. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I agree with you, Scott. Just coming out of nowhere, that's really one thing that I wanted to emphasize about it. Guardians of the Galaxy is a fantastic, just the movie itself, even if you're not looking at the quality of what was made, it's a fantastic underdog story because this was just kind of a shot in the dark. Marvel was just doing it as kind of a side thing. It wasn't really integrated into the Avengers universe. Really even in 2, it kind of hints at it a little bit in 2, but this was something that was just completely separate from the chronology that they had been doing for the most part up until they actually joined up in Infinity War. And so there was just so much going against this movie, the fact that it wasn't a well-known property, but they, to Marvel's credit, they got the right people involved, they got an all-star cast, they put a lot of work and a lot of love to it, and it paid off, and it basically wound up launching, or maybe not launching, but definitely propelling forward an entire comic book series in Guardians of the Galaxy, and something we can all enjoy now.
I think what you mentioned about it not being that tied into the rest of the universe is actually a strength of it.
Probably so, yeah.
Lots of times when we're talking about these Marvel movies, particularly the MCU movies, lots of them stand or fall based off of what other movies surround it. Like sometimes a movie that's like ho hum becomes good because of a reveal in a later movie, which is good, is nice. But when you consider someone that's coming from the outside of the MCU and hasn't really got this back catalog of movies in their memory and understand what's going on, it's nice to be able to point them to something that's like, you could watch this movie and you don't have to know anything about all the rest of the movies. You could possibly enjoy this movie on its own and, see if it's something you want to get into, kind of thing.
That's actually an interesting point. As somebody who's seen all of them, I don't know that I would have thought of that because I'm so integrated into the Marvel universe. I wouldn't have come at it from that angle. But if I'm trying to start somebody out on the Marvel universe, somebody that doesn't really like superhero movies, you could kind of go back to Iron Man maybe. But if I were trying to get someone interested in the series and do sort of a dipping their toe in kind of thing, I think Guardians is the better movie to do that with because it's so comedy focused. It's not really your traditional action movie, even though it has that aspect in it a little bit. And there's not a massive learning curve for it. Granted, knowing a little bit about the Kree Empire and the history of it helps some, but you can step into that movie as somebody who's never even heard of a comic book and still have a pretty good time with nothing else, just the music and the jokes.
Number 9.
And number 9 on this list is going to be Doctor Strange. Scott, what was your takeaway from Doctor Strange?
I mean, I think the biggest one is that Benedict Cumberbatch is probably the second strongest of the character, or like of the actors that they got. I mean, I think Tony Stark is definitely the best fit, but I thought Benedict Cumberbatch is an amazing actor. I was just really into the storyline. The main thing that I think when I was watching that movie, I was like, just the colors in this are perfect. They're not over the top. They just they catch you, and it was great colors the whole time. And I was really into the story in the movie for the whole time. And I that's not at all something that I can say for all of the other movies. I felt like this was one of the ones that hooked me in for the full 2 hours, which was a big selling point for me.
It has that way of bringing somebody in very quickly. And especially when we're talking about a series of movies that sometimes do have a pretty steep learning curve that you either need to know what happened in the last movie to really understand what's happening in this movie. That's something that these movies probably as a whole don't do as well as most movie franchises. But you're right that I think that in a lot of ways, this does a pretty good job of bringing somebody in pretty well that doesn't necessarily, not somebody that's not necessarily interested in Marvel movies, but it does bring somebody in and it sort of keeps them interested the entire time. The pacing is very, very good in this movie.
Honestly, I don't remember the story that well. It was like his hands got messed up. He didn't want his hands to be messed up, so he looked for a way to fix his hands, and guys fending off an interdimensional time travel warp hole acid trip. But
and there you go, the plot of Doctor Strange in 15 seconds.
That's literally, I'm reading it on IMDb. That's exactly what it said.
But yeah, the trip part is what I thought was like its strongest point. Is it was a visual adventure, much in the way that Inception was, and it was just fun. It was entertaining and fun just to see all of the different colors and the bendy, twisty, mind bendy kind of stuff going on in the movie, in the one part where he's facing off with the big bad guy and he keeps doing a time loop over and over and like freaking him out.
Dormammu!
It was funny. It was good. I enjoyed the movie.
So this is actually one I did not see in the theaters when it first came out. It was one of those that I was like, who is Doctor Strange? Like, I'd heard about Captain America and Thor and Iron Man. Like, you hear about and the Hulk. Like, you hear about all these mainline, heroes, the ones that you see all over theme parks and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, this dude named Doctor Strange, I told everybody at church, I'm never going to see it. Well, I finally sat down and watched it. And for one, the fact that it's basically a standalone movie is huge to me. Like I could sit down and watch that not knowing a thing about the guy. Don't have to see any of the other movies in the Marvel universe, and I can love this movie. It's that good. I could watch it over and over. I love that. I love the story that as you guys said, it was basically an acid trip, but to me, it was really cool. Just seeing someone for the first time. Again, this is the first one that I watched. It was not a main superhero movie, and so to see someone with a brand new set of powers that never heard his story before, it just kind of like pulled me in. And we've got it on iTunes now, and I could watch it over and over. Unlike a lot of the ones on my list, it wasn't about the explosions and the action and everything. This one was more about how the development of the character went. And he's Caleb, you know me, you know I'm wild and crazy. I'm I'm always on edge with things. I love excitement and stuff like that. But
Right.
for this one to have a character that was not all about that was actually really cool. Like he's not the guy that just wants to go beat up everybody. Like he actually sits and thinks about stuff where everybody else just kind of rushes in and does their own thing. So it was a nice change up, and I really appreciate the movie.
Yeah, I do appreciate the cerebral nature of Doctor Strange, that he likes to sit back and plan. He's a little bit more cautious than maybe some of the cowboy-esque characters in the Marvel Universe. But I got to say, one of the things that I really, really enjoy about this movie is that I know that Scott's probably not going to be happy with me saying this. I think it's a better version of Iron Man because their characters are similar in a lot of ways, but I think that Bandersnatch Cumberbund's performance made Doctor Strange a little bit more likable than Tony Stark in the original Iron Man. And the plots are very similar. Brilliant scientist, somebody that is absolutely at the top of their game. They're rich. They feel like they've got everything. Then this life-changing event hits them, which results in a medical problem that they have to figure out a way to overcome. And they do so by, in the same way that Iron Man overcomes his heart issue with his mind and his technology, Doctor Strange does the same thing with magic. And being somebody that's very drawn to like medieval fantasy and magic and that kind of genre, it just kind of makes sense that if I have to pick between two very similar movies, and one is science-based and one is magic-based, I'm going to go with the one that has the aesthetic that I like better, and that's Doctor Strange. But personally, I've always liked Doctor Strange. I've always been a fan of his. He's really great in the new Avengers comic book arc. I've liked him ever since I think I was about 9 or 10 years old, and so I've always been drawn to that character. I was very different than Andrew in that sense. I knew who he was. I knew his backstory. But it's just such a great film. Then they captured it in such a great way. And when you talk about great cinematography, I think this may have the best one on the list. Think about it. They made an inanimate, well, not an inanimate object, but they made a character out of his cape. And it's a great character. It has some great moments. It's really funny. And yet somehow they worked all of that in there. It's got action. It's got great cinematography. It's got comedy, great character development, really seeing Doctor Strange grow from this arrogant know-it-all into somebody that has a pretty good deal of humility and really does want to help other people out. I think it's a great film.
Number 8.
Number 8 on this list, Black Panther. Scott, you had Black Panther ranked pretty highly, so go ahead and tell us what you like about Black Panther.
Everything. I just loved it. I mean, I loved, like, Shala was awesome. I mean, the ritual part where they go to, I don't know if it's like the afterlife or whatever, where they go and see all of the other Black Panthers. Like, I just love the color that they used there. I thought the storyline was amazing. I mean, this is by far the best villain in the Marvel movies. Michael B. Jordan, like Chadwick Boseman, just awesome jobs. And then you had, like, I thought something that was cool was that you had stronger females in it. You had the main scientist was, like, I don't know, what was she, like a 20-year-old woman or something, like, and she was able to develop all this stuff. I just thought that was a really cool part of the movie where, like, it wasn't these, like, watching a 007 movie where it was these nerds in a basement or whatever giving him technology. It was,
yeah, I wanted to interject on that real quickly, not to interrupt you, but one thing that I like about her is that not only is she a nerd, but she's a nerd with a personality. Like she actually has good lines. She has a sense of humor. She's pretty quick-witted.
Yep. Okay, that's kind of what I was getting at, but struggling. Yeah, I mean, I thought her character in general was really funny and like a really good in the movie.
One of my main takeaways that like came to mind as I was watching the movie, and I'm kind of glad that I watched it early because it became so sensational so quickly. Like I watched it within the first week it was in theaters, and it became like so sensationalized that it became something that there was acceptable opinions and unacceptable opinions about. So, but one of my main takeaways as I was watching it was I saw a very strong Malcolm X versus MLK kind of approach theme in the movie, whereas Killmonger wanted to take the more Malcolm X approach, which, you know, I'm not saying, I guess that's one thing I should caveat. I don't see Killmonger as strictly a villain per se. I see him as sort of an anti-hero with understandable motivations, but the wrong prescription to solve the problem. And obviously he was placed as the antagonist for that reason. And he reminded me a lot of Malcolm X, somebody who could command a lot of respect and, you know, pool of following. But at the end of the day, his answer was violent overthrow. Whereas T'Challa, isn't it?
Yes.
T'Challa was more of the no, let's take a more peaceful approach to it. I saw him more as the MLK kind of character.
Yeah, that's a really interesting dichotomy that you present there, and I think it's accurate. I don't know that I ever put it in those terms, but that's a pretty good way to summarize the difference in those two characters. And I have to say, I think that the message sort of underlying that is a very appropriate, very timely one.
Yondu. Let me just start with that. Yondu was his name.
Right. If you don't understand why we're talking about Yondu, go back to number 10.
Yeah, this is another one I didn't see in theaters because, well, for one, we just didn't have the money to at the time. But for two, I heard a lot of differing opinions on things. Basically, going back to what was just said about the Malcolm X versus MLK idea, and that actually was one of the biggest reasons I didn't watch it until it actually came out on Netflix. From a movie standpoint, I think it's excellent. From a political standpoint, please keep it out of my movies. I don't like the politics. I don't like the race baiting. I hate to say it that way because I feel like a lot of the Malcolm X side of it could be used to fuel people's imaginations and want to take it to that extreme.
Just want to ask for clarification so I better understand your position on this. Do you think that was something that was inherent in the movie? In other words, that it was put in there intentionally and that's what they were trying to do? Or do you feel like that was sort of a result of the conversations that happened after the movie?
I don't know. For me, it was, and it may have they may have had. I know they like film movies well in advance, but it seemed really ill-timed. And I guess there's not really a good time in the past 10 years where we've had good race relations among anybody. But to have a movie in there about the Black Panthers, which let me rephrase that, called the Black Panther, when we have a Black Panther group that is extremely racist in the United States and is vicious and violent, and the movie, the Black Panther is actually the opposite. The Black Panther is the guy who's trying to be good and trying to do good. But did you say his name was Killmonger?
Killmonger, yeah.
Malcolm X type movement. And I guess I didn't appreciate that because I feel like it was a little bit tasteless. But if that, again, that's politics, that's underlying things. From a movie standpoint, if we didn't have those issues in the United States, this is an amazing film. I loved it. It was action-packed. The story was absolutely amazing. I love following the characters from start to finish. But it's just those little things that I think this is one of the reasons it didn't make my top 10 is because I don't like politics being in movies and making it that obvious.
Of course, the Malcolm X part was the antagonist
I know.
Like
I
he was
know. So you're supposed to hate him. You're supposed to hate what he's doing.
not necessarily hate him, but you're supposed to understand that his ideas were wrong.
Yeah.
You know, personally, I think that that's one of the things that makes it compelling is that they have a villain that you can relate to, and even if you don't agree with his answer, you get where he's coming from. And frankly, I think that's the reason that we'll talk about this, you know, when we come to it. But that's one of the reasons I like Thanos. Thanos,
Yeah.
you get where he's coming from. You don't agree with his answer, but you understand how he got there.
Right.
And
yeah.
and so that was kind of the way that I looked at it. I really, as far as this movie goes, I do think that the politics surrounding it made it slightly overrated. I think that it's probably remembered as better than it is, but that's not to say that I don't really love the movie. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really, really enjoyed the film. I personally think that people are going to remember it a little more fondly than it did. And let's be honest, I really like Black Panther. Again, I'm not trying to bash the movie at all. But this movie getting nominated for what, 4 or 5 Oscars and Endgame not getting one, that's a tragedy. Like, I don't understand that at all, but that's me.
Number 7.
Number 7 on our list, Logan. In a lot of ways, it's a very unique movie in the Marvel catalog. I know it's not an MCU movie. I almost said Marvel Universe. But in the catalog of movies that were based off of Marvel properties, I don't think that there's anything that really looks anything similar to this personally. It's just so very different in a lot of ways. In theme, in tone, in the execution of the story. And there's really a lot to love here. I'll talk about that in a second. This time, let's go ahead and start with you, Andrew.
I'm glad you start with me because I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there that I got this mixed up with Wolverine. I have never seen this movie in my life.
Good.
So moving on to
Crap.
the next person.
What?
I can't believe you've never seen Logan.
I'm gonna watch it after this. Like as soon as we get done with
It's
this
really
segment, I'm
good.
gonna go.
Do you
get
like
it.
Western? Do you like Westerns? Because this is a Western.
It's basically a Western. Yeah.
All right. Y'all fill me in. Tell me what it's about and how you like it.
Okay, well, you can listen to us then.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it's a Western, and I was kind of foreshadowing a little bit when talking about Guardians of the Galaxy and how Marvel was starting to blend genres a little bit. This almost wasn't even a superhero movie. Like it kind of wasn't at all a superhero movie. It was a Western road drama that happened to have a few people with powers in it, and it was absolutely amazing. You had this. It was gritty and real, and like you had this rundown, tired Logan that seemed about ready just to give up on everything anyway. And then you had Professor Xavier, who is, suffering from dementia and little psychic seizures or whatever was going on at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And Logan had granted to him a purpose. There hasn't been any mutants born in X number of years, no pun intended. And you have this little girl who is fighting for her life, and he sees a bit of himself in her. Turns out he ends up seeing more of himself in her, but and he agrees to help take her to this safe zone, and that becomes his mission for somebody who hasn't had a mission in any amount of time. The rest of the X-Men group, and it's the same Wolverine from the X-Men movies who fought alongside Cyclops and Storm and Rogue and all that stuff, and they're not around anymore, and there's no new mutants going. He's one of the last of a dying age, of a dying breed they've lost, basically. And then you've got this young mutant that's kind of hope for, I guess, their kind in a certain way, but also hope for him personally, for somebody that's lost any will, any reason, anything to strive and fight for. Now he's got her, and he takes her all the way. And shoot, I can't quite remember the very end, but there was a lot of closure in a world within superhero movies where you don't often get closure. It's just everything's left open ended, which is really cool.
No, it of course does end with spoilers. I almost don't want to say it because I know Andrew is there and he hasn't seen it. There is a lot of.
You told me the whole movie, so
Yeah, there is a lot of closure there. There's a lot of a finality with this movie, which you're right, we're not accustomed to in a lot of superhero movies. And I think that one of the things that I started out with talking about this is that it is so very different from what you're accustomed to seeing in the superhero genre. And I think that was probably the biggest thing. There is no payoff at the end. There is no hint at what's coming next. They were like, this is the end of Wolverine's story. This is the last chapter. And they left it that way. And to a certain degree, you have to respect that. Like, you almost sit there and is like, man, I'd love to see more of this, but at the same time, like, they ended it the right way.
Yeah. You'd rather be left wanting more than left being like, you could have stopped.
Right. I mean, to compare it to something completely unrelated to comic book movies, it's kind of like the difference in Full Metal Alchemist and a lot of other animes. I mean, some anime series go on for like 500 episodes and nothing happens in all of them. Mm-hmm. Full Metal Alchemist went for like, 2 seasons? And they're like, and that's it. We're done. That was the story.
Or like Death Note, it seemed like it ended at a certain point and then they kept going. It's like, you could have stopped there and it would have been beautiful.
Right. So I do think there is something to be said for quitting while you're ahead, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
I still don't really understand why a 6'2" Hugh Jackman is playing a 5'3" character, but whatever.
True, but that's been true for over a decade now.
Yeah, I know. It's still weird, but I mean, I agree. Like, I think not the craziest part, but like the most interesting part about this to me was that this came out like the same time as Deadpool. And so it was like, you saw Deadpool, like, oh, this is where it's going to take it now, where it's like R-rated and funny. And then Logan is like, no. I mean, I thought it was a really good movie. I personally didn't find it as memorable as you guys did, I guess. I mean, it was clearly a good movie. I thought it was well done. I guess I just thought I don't know, it was sad a lot for no reason, it seemed to me. I don't know. Good movie.
Sad because it's the end, man. Like, Patrick Stewart's been Professor X for a decade and a half. Hugh Jackman's been Wolverine for a decade and a half.
I think they saved their best.
It's the final goodbye.
Yeah, I think they saved their best for last, though. Like, the thing that I like about this movie and the thing that I'm constantly bashing X-Men movies for, and I love the X-Men series. I love the franchise. I've been reading the comics since I was a kid. But the problem that a lot of the X-Men movies run into is they try to cram way too many characters in way too short a time. And when you do that, you wind up not caring about the characters. And the two best X-Men movies, in my opinion, is this one and X-Men 2. And they both didn't have that problem because they kept a very tight focus on a small group of characters. I mean, in this one, you've got Logan, Laura, Patrick Stewart's character, Professor X. And there's really not even a big antagonist except for the other Wolverines. So, I mean, there's just it's a very small cast. It's very focused, and it really zeroes in on who the characters are, what their motivations are. And when a movie does that, you actually care whether the characters survive or not. I mean, in several X-Men movies, there have been characters dying left and right. No one cared because nobody knew anything about them. And so I think this was the best way to end, in a lot of ways, the X-Men universe and X-Men franchise. And I know that it's not technically ended. There's new stuff coming out too, but it was a perfect finality to it because it seemed like it corrected all the mistakes a lot of the earlier X-Men movies have made. Let's go ahead.
Like X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Right. There's like 50 characters in that thing, and no one cares about any of them. But anyway.
Andrew, you've seen that, right?
Andrew's losing it over there. Yeah. Not Fox's best material. Eye lasers and katanas coming out of people's fists.
I'm glad Deadpool made fun of it.
I am too. I will say that if nothing else, Fox does have a sense of humor about itself. It will poke fun at its own mistakes.
Number 6.
Number 6 on this list, The Avengers, the original one. I know that, of course, Iron Man is the one that kicked everything off, but Avengers is the movie that really got the collaboration going, because before Avengers happened, the only time where we got to see these characters interact with each other is basically Easter egg scenes. So at the end of The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man makes a quick cameo, or at the end of Iron Man, we hear Agent Coulson say that they're starting something up with S.H.I.E.L.D. This was the culmination of all of that. This is the first time we really get to see these characters actually interact with one another, and it made for a great experience.
All right, so I've actually seen this one. Like Logan. Excellent movie. Of course, I love that it's from start to finish in that movie. It's just action and suspense the whole way through. You don't really feel like there's a lot of dead moments in it. Even in the small dead moments, it's like 2 or 3 minutes at a time. Then it's right back to the action. That was the first time that we ever saw all the superheroes together in one movie. So it felt really cool to have that after seeing all their standalone movies. One fun thing that I loved. Well, let me start with this. That saying that Samuel L. Jackson says, I recognize that the council has made a decision. That whole thing, that was probably the funniest line in the entire movie. I think that I've heard kids say that when I've been substitute teaching. So it's been great.
That man is playing Galaga.
I love that too. But I think probably the funniest thing and the best part about the movie for me came way after the movie came out. I found out that my goodness, Tony Stark's
Robert Downey Jr.
Thank you. I was like, Robert what? Robert Downey Jr. So there's several scenes in the movie where he's got snacks. And the reason he has snacks is because he hides them all over the stinking set. They said, like in all these little reviews I've been reading, there's a part where he's talking to Banner and he's asking him to give him his ideas, and he like pulls out a snack and hands it to him. And that was like totally unscripted. He reaches and he just goes with it and takes the snack out. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? That kind of stuff is what makes movies great. Like all the stupid stuff from Star Wars that you see when like you see a stormtrooper hit his head. That kind of stuff is hysterical. And the stuff that you don't know about until you read into the movies make a movie for me.
You know,
so
I genuinely think that that's probably what working with Robert Downey Jr. is like all the time. That they don't really tell him to say anything. They just put the camera on him and go like, all right, action, and just see what happens. That's just the indication I get from some of the behind the scenes stuff that I've seen. But
you know, the scary part about it when you were talking about X-Men was like they were bringing all these superstars together, or you know, A-list, I guess at this point, people to be in the Avengers in one movie to accomplish a goal, and it was something that they'd been working on for 4 years through like all these movies that we had seen, and they knocked it out of the park. They did it perfectly. Everyone plays together so well. I mean, there's action all the time. There's like a lot of comedy with like the Hulk just smashing random things. You know, I don't know. I don't. It was a great movie. It probably wasn't super deep as far as like a plot goes, but yeah, it was action. It had a great comedy, and then it brought everyone together very well. It made sure everyone got their screen time. Yeah, just really good movie.
Well, the main thing I noticed is there's action. Like from the start to finish, there's just action. There aren't very many story moments, and even when there are story moments, it's only 2 or 3 minutes, and it's back to action. Yeah, Loki was a great villain, but you didn't really need this movie to know that. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was decent for that value. And like Scott said, it was kind of a checkpoint in the Marvel game plan, basically. And lots of things had been building up to that. So it had a lot of value for that moment of, yes, it's finally here. And you wanted to see all those characters on screen working together and fighting together in the scenes that they offered. But one of my main criteria for judging the movies is the story that it tells, and how well it tells the story, and how the other aspects serve the story. And I don't know, I just didn't think there was very much of it in this. It was entertaining, but so is a Transformers movie, but I'm not going to put them on the top 10.
I think that that's probably fair. But one thing that I'll say about it is there is a lot of spectacle in this film. Like you and Andrew both alluded to, this thing has a ton of action. It's almost like one big long action scene. And I personally really find that okay. I do very much appreciate a movie's story and plotline. But I think that the moments that you did get that really make this movie great and make it impactful actually revolve around the interpersonal interactions and the fact that, hey, this is the first time that they're finally all going to come together. That was sort of punctuated by the fact that all of their interpersonal reactions are really good. I mean, yes, there's a lot of action sequences where, for example, Hulk winds up flipping out and going up against Thor, but the fact that that has the undertone of Thor and Hulk not getting along with one another, then the fact that they play that off so well is one of the reasons that it being basically one long action scene kind of works. The same thing with, for example, even though they don't actually have a fight scene, Tony Stark and Captain America. I mean, to see the fact that those two, because I think for a long time in comic books and something that a lot of people were expecting if they didn't really know their comic book counterpart versions, they were kind of expecting all the heroes to get together and be all buddy with one another, and then they're just going to go out and fight whoever the next big bad is. The real challenge in this movie doesn't even so much come from Loki. The question that is constantly in question, the thing that keeps you on the edge of your seat is not really even so much, are the Avengers going to wind up pulling off saving the world from the Chitauri? It's, are they going to be able to come together as a group? Are they going to be able to put whatever differences they have aside and be the heroes that we all expect them to be? And I think that that's part of the reason that the way that this film goes works so well. Because, yeah, I mean, I love the action, too. It's great action. I love the comedy in it. I mean, I still think that the puny god scene between Hulk and Loki, that might be one of the best. That's probably one of the best moments in the entire Marvel catalog. But I think that the interpersonal relationship is where this movie really shines, and showing how these different characters interact with one another. Hawkeye and Black Widow, it sets up that relationship, which becomes really, really important later on. It sets up the tension between Captain America and Iron Man, which becomes literally an entire movie in the franchise. And so there's just a lot of this movie is set up, but it's good set up, and they did it in such a way that you're right. In some ways, this was the culmination of all of the effort of bringing these guys together, but it also served the purpose of just making you want more and anticipating what was coming next. So I think it really does those two things very well, which is odd that those are two things that almost seem in contradiction to one another, both being a culmination of everything and also being the start of everything, but it wound up kind of balancing the two.
Number 5.
Number 5 on our list, Iron Man, the original Iron Man.
First, I'll say this is a crying shame that this is not ranked higher. The original Iron Man it's the original, it's the best. You kind of hit on it earlier. Like, Iron Man was not a widely known character. Actually, the only reason you knew about Iron Man was because of the Demon in a Bottle series.
Right.
But, when you had Neil Adams took the nine series arc. Wait, was it Neil Adams? Doesn't matter. No, it was David Michelin. Okay, sorry. You had him, and he took this arc of he added this depth to this character that you hadn't seen. But outside of that, no one cared about Iron Man. No one had the Tales of Suspense 39. It just wasn't a big deal. But then this movie comes out, and you have this perfect actor to play it, who is himself could not be better. And it was his comeback tour after his personal demons. So what better person to play this character? The comedy that mixes in, the story is awesome. I mean, Jon Favreau is not a great director, but a pretty solid director. And it's by far his best job, and he's in the movie too, which is another weird one. Mm-hmm. It was just such a huge risk all around, and it paid off so well. because you had this guy that was like the main character was just getting over an addiction, and you had John Favreau, who his only things at that point were indie movies that had like cult followings, but still indie movies, low budget things. And it all just came together for this awesome movie that completely kicked off a whole new genre, and it's just awesome.
I think that's one thing that I think sometimes people do underappreciate, that this thing was such a massive gamble. Like, Marvel put everything. There wasn't even really a Marvel Studios to speak of at that point, or at least not to the level that it is now, that we think of it as being an independent studio. They did it through Universal. They put everything on Black 21, and it worked. All those behind the scenes things that you're talking about really make the story in the movie, but also the story of the movie and how the movie came together, really compelling as well.
Well, yeah, like Scott was saying, Robert Downey Jr. was having his own sort of redemption type moment in landing this role, and that's kind of what the character does in the movie too. Is he witnesses firsthand, by being a victim of the negative consequences of his indiscriminate arms dealing, and ends up being shown mercy by somebody who is also a victim of his indiscriminate arms dealing, the doctor who basically saves his life by creating the electromagnet to get the shrapnel out of his heart. And then that changes him as a person. You got a lot of character development where he wants to he's like, well, I've done all this harm through, the way I've run this company and what I've done with it. Maybe I could do a little bit of good now with this, new suit that I've created. And, you don't see a complete 180 in character, but you really see that he's more focused on wanting to do good at this point. Whereas before it was all about me, 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 me. And a lot of that stays, especially at the end of I was
about to say, that doesn't go away completely by the end of this film, but yeah, you're right.
Right. He goes from being complete self-centered and remains arrogant, but self-centered and arrogant, kind of difficult to be around kind of guy, to like a hero, a flawed hero, but still a hero. And he's fun. It's so fun. His arrogance is hilarious. It really makes for some good moments on screen.
Yeah, I love how
there's a charm and cockiness somehow.
The theme of Iron Man is absolute power corrupts absolutely, unless you're Tony Stark, in which case it just makes you adorable.
I am not as deep as you guys are into this. The reason I liked Iron Man so much is, for one, it was the start of a series that I ended up loving. But as a kid, I've never read comics in my life. I watched cartoons of Iron Man, and I had I had at least 20 little action figures of Iron Man, because every different action figure, you had to get a different one for each set of armor that he had. And man, I loved those to death. I used to act like I was Iron Man. I loved everything that Iron Man was. His suit could do anything that he wanted it, or he had a different suit to do different things.
And Andrew just explained why toy manufacturers love Iron Man as a character.
I mean, hey, listen, they got my money. Back then it was like $3 for action figure, but no, it was just a good story. Like, it was really the first of its kind. I mean, obviously it was the very first movie that they did, but in this series. But for me, I don't know, it was just kind of like the first movie in most series matters. This one, to me, has a lot more emphasis because of what followed. Like, everything followed Iron Man from the very start of the Avengers series. And it was just, they packed a lot of stuff in there that I didn't fully understand at the time. Black Widow, Agent Coulson, everything, like all these different things that happen in the movies that you don't know if you don't follow the comics. And so for me, watching it play out again over a course of several movies, it was really cool to watch all that.
One thing that I think is really interesting that Andrew just kind of highlighted is that there are two different Marvel fans when it comes to the movies. You got the guys like me and Scott and Ward that knew these guys from the comics, knew them growing up, that really loved seeing their favorite comic book stories come to life on screen and seeing what that would look like if you had real people playing them. And then you've also got fans like Andrew that never even heard of these people before, or maybe have seen them just through the lens of a Saturday morning cartoon and get to experience a lot of those stories for the first time. And the fact that they do such a great job of playing to both of those audiences, I think is a really big testament to how well the Marvel Cinematic Universe did. And for the MCU movies, at least, not only was the trend started, not only was the universe started with the Iron Man movie, that trend was also started with the first Iron Man movie to make something that was accessible to the non-fan, but also a really, really big payoff and something that longtime fans of the series could really appreciate as well. And they did that, I think, a lot with some of the Easter eggs, like Working Agent Coulson with S.H.I.E.L.D. in and hinting that there's going to be a larger universe coming soon. That was something that they really catered to the fans that understood what the strategic homeland espionage, whatever that long acronym is. When they said that, and I actually knew what that meant, and I was geeking out, no one else in the theater understood why. It's those things that really play to the hardcore fans, but it doesn't leave a big gap for people that aren't as familiar with it to have to figure out. And with Iron Man specifically, I don't want to just replow old ground here, but the casting was just so spot on, it's scary. Like, the scene where he's doing the press conference and he's been overseas and he's just sitting down in front of the podium munching on a cheeseburger. Like, does anybody doubt that Robert Downey Jr. wouldn't do a press briefing like that? That just seems like what he would do. And so the fact that his performance brought life to something that was really already established in the character, and that Iron Man's super relatable. As much as I love Superman, Superman's not a relatable character in a lot of ways. Iron Man's a very flawed individual, and the fact that they got somebody that is so likable, that is so charming, that really personifies who Tony Stark is as a character, that's a real testament to them picking Robert Downey Jr. as their Tony Stark, and it wound up working out really well for them.
Something about this movie is, like, for me personally, they announced this movie, and this is what really got me into comics. Like, they announced the movie in like August of 2005, and it was the day before band camp, and just them announcing it. I couldn't sleep, and I had a crappy day at band camp. Not that matters, but like I stayed up all night, like just researching comics. And this was actually they announced it the same time that they were running the Extremis series for Iron Man. Mm-hmm. So it was just so interesting that they announced this movie. So then I went to the local comic book store and picked up this series as it came out, and then that turned into a movie. I had to wait 3 years before Iron Man became a real movie, but then this series that I was reading turned into a movie, which I thought was really cool. Of just how it all came back.
Right, and that goes back to what I was saying, is it really being a big payoff for longtime fans of the comics. Honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of Iron Man in the comics. I came to like the character a little bit more with the movies. I still kind of hate Iron Man because of how Civil War played out. But anyway, I still do like the character in some ways. That was a hard hill for me to get over. And I mean, for those watching, I mean the comic book series Civil War, not the movie Civil War. Well, as you can clearly see, we had a ton to talk about. There was so much to do in this episode. There's so much to discuss when it comes to the top 10 Marvel movies of all time. And, we kind of expected that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead, take a break. We've already done numbers 5 through 10. So this is going to be part 1. Part 2 with the top 4 Marvel movies is going to be coming out next week. You can check it out right here, same time, same channel, right here on Tactics on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope. Wherever you're watching us, we certainly appreciate it. Be sure to check us out again next week, 6 p.m. on Friday, and we will have the top 4 Marvel movies. Until then, stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2020.